I'm Marie, 58 years old, and for the past 3 years since my husband David passed away, I've been living in our beautiful beach house in Malibu. This place isn't just a home to me, it's where every sunset reminds me of the life we built together. I thought I knew my daughter Ashley better than anyone in this world. We used to be so close, sharing everything from morning coffee to late-night phone calls about her dreams and fears. But recently something had shifted between us, and I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. There was a distance in her voice, a coolness that made my heart ache in ways I hadn't felt since David's funeral. Before I share what happened next, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and please hit that like button and subscribe. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this story unfolds, because what my daughter did next changed everything between us forever. When David died 3 years ago from a sudden heart attack, he left behind what most people would consider a comfortable inheritance. Our beach house, our savings account, and the life insurance policy that everyone knew about. What they didn't know, including Ashley, was that I had been quietly building my own real estate portfolio for over 20 years. Every bonus from my marketing job, every tax refund, every dollar I could save went into carefully chosen properties across Los Angeles County. You see, growing up during the recession of the early 2000s had taught me the value of financial independence. I never wanted to be caught off guard the way my own mother was when my father lost his job. So while David focused on his construction business and our primary residence, I focused on creating multiple streams of income that would secure our future. By the time David passed, I owned 6 rental properties, 2 small apartment complexes, and a commercial building downtown. But I kept this information private, stored in a separate safety deposit box, managed through a different bank, because I believed in the old saying about not putting all your eggs in one basket. Our Malibu beach house sat on 3/4 of an acre with direct ocean access. The 2-story Mediterranean-style home featured 4 bedrooms, 3-bathroom, a gourmet kitchen with granite countertops and floor-to-ceiling windows that captured the most spectacular sunrise views you could imagine. David and I had purchased it back in 1998 for $450,000. Today, similar properties in our neighborhood were selling for upwards of $3.2 million. Ashley had been born when I was 26, and for 32 years, she had been the center of my universe. She grew up in this house, learned to swim in the ocean, just steps from our back door, built sandcastles on our private stretch of beach, and brought her high school friends here for graduation parties. Every major milestone in her life had happened within these walls or on this stretch of sand. But about 4 years ago, Ashley married Brandon, a smooth-talking investment advisor who always seemed to have a new get-rich-quick scheme brewing in his mind. At first, I thought he was charming and ambitious. He treated Ashley well, made her laugh, and seemed genuinely interested in building a life with her. However, as time went on, I began to notice subtle changes in my daughter's behavior and priorities. Where Ashley had once called me every few days, just to chat about her work at the local elementary school where she taught 3rd grade, those calls became weekly, then monthly. When I suggested lunch dates or shopping trips, she often seemed distracted, checking her phone constantly, or making excuses to cut our time short. Brandon always seemed to have some urgent financial matter that required her immediate attention. The first real red flag came about 6 months ago, when Ashley started asking unusual questions about our family finances. During what I thought was a casual conversation over dinner, she asked how much David had left me, whether I had enough money for retirement, and if I ever felt overwhelmed managing the house alone. At the time, I attributed her curiosity to natural concern for her aging mother. Now I realize she and Brandon were gathering information for something much more calculating. 3 months ago, Ashley began making comments about how isolated I was living alone in such a large house. She would say things like, "Mom, aren't you lonely out here by yourself?" Or, This place is so big for just one person. Don't you think something smaller would be easier to maintain? I brushed off these comments, thinking she was genuinely worried about my well-being. I assured her that I loved my independence, that I had wonderful neighbors, and that the house kept me connected to her father's memory. The strange behavior escalated dramatically 1 week before the incident that would change everything between Ashley and me forever. She called me on a Tuesday afternoon while I was tending to my garden, asking if I could locate all the property documents for the beach house. She claimed she needed them to update our family's insurance policies and wanted to make sure everything was properly documented in case of an emergency. Something about her tone felt off, but I complied with her request. I gathered the deed, the property tax records, the homeowner's insurance policy, and the original mortgage documents that had been paid off years earlier. When Ashley came by to pick them up, she wasn't alone. Brandon waited in the car while she quickly flipped through each document, photographing them with her phone before handing them back to me. "Thanks, Mum," she said, kissing my cheek in a way that felt rushed and impersonal. "We're just trying to get everything organized for your protection." 2 days later, my next-door neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, knocked on my door with a concerned expression. She's a retired librarian in her 70s who has lived next to us for 15 years and has become like family to me since David's passing. "Marie, dear," she said, settling into my kitchen with a cup of tea. "I hope you don't mind me mentioning this, but yesterday, while you were at the grocery store, a young couple came by asking questions about your house. They wanted to know how long you'd lived here, whether you were planning to sell, and if you lived alone. I didn't give them any information, of course, but they seemed very interested in the property details." My stomach dropped as she described the couple. The man was tall with dark hair and an expensive watch. The woman was blonde, well-dressed, and appeared to be in her early 30s. It sounded exactly like Ashley and Brandon. But why would they be canvassing my neighborhood without telling me? That evening, I decided to check my home office, where I kept important documents. Several files had been moved around, not dramatically, but enough for someone with my organized nature to notice. Papers that I typically kept in alphabetical order were slightly out of sequence. A folder containing financial statements had been shifted from its usual position in the filing cabinet. The realization that someone had been going through my private papers while I was out sent chills down my spine. The only people who had keys to my house were Ashley and my housekeeper, Mrs. Rodriguez, who had been with our family for over 10 years and whom I trusted completely. I called Ashley that night, trying to keep my voice casual while probing for information. "Honey, Mrs. Patterson mentioned she saw you and Brandon in the neighborhood yesterday. Were you planning to stop by? I would have loved to see you." There was a pause on the other end of the line before Ashley responded. "Oh, that. We were just driving through the area and thought we'd check out the neighborhood. You know how Brandon is always interested in real estate trends." Her explanation felt forced and incomplete, but I didn't want to accuse my own daughter of lying. Instead, I made an appointment with our family attorney, Harold Martinez, who had handled David's estate and had been a friend for over 20 years. "Harold," I said during our meeting, "I need to confirm the status of my property ownership. Are there any circumstances under which someone could sell my house without my explicit consent?" Harold reviewed my documents thoroughly and assured me that as the sole owner of the property, no one could legally sell it without my signature on the deed transfer. However, he did mention that the medical power of attorney I had signed for Ashley a year earlier could potentially be misused if someone claimed I was mentally incompetent. "Marie, is there something specific you're worried about?" he asked, his experienced lawyer instincts picking up on my anxiety. I shared my concerns about Ashley's recent behavior, the strange questions and the unexplained interest in my financial situation. Harold listened carefully and suggested we schedule a comprehensive review of all my legal documents to ensure my wishes were clearly documented and protected. The morning that would forever alter my relationship with Ashley arrived on a crisp Thursday in November. I was enjoying my usual breakfast of oatmeal with fresh blueberries and coffee, while watching the sunrise paint the ocean in shades of pink and gold. This daily ritual had become sacred to me, a time of peace and reflection that connected me to David's memory and centered my thoughts for the day ahead. At exactly 9:30 in the morning, I heard Ashley's car pull into my driveway. This was unusual because she typically called before visiting and she rarely came by so early in the week. Through my front window, I could see both Ashley and Brandon getting out of their black SUV. Ashley's posture was rigid and determined, while Brandon carried a leather briefcase that he never brought during social visits. I opened the front door before they could knock, greeting them with my usual warm smile, despite the knot of anxiety that had been growing in my stomach. "Good morning, sweetheart," I said, reaching to hug Ashley. "This is a wonderful surprise. Would you like some coffee?" Ashley's response was unlike anything I had ever experienced from my daughter. Instead of returning my embrace, she stepped back and looked at me with an expression that was both serious and strangely distant. "Mum, we need to talk," she said, in a tone that immediately told me this wasn't a social visit. "Can we sit down in the living room?" My heart began to race as we walked to the sitting area overlooking the ocean. Ashley and Brandon positioned themselves on the sofa across from my favorite armchair, their body language formal and businesslike. Brandon opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder thick with documents. "Mum." Ashley began, her voice steady but lacking any warmth. "Brandon and I have been discussing your situation here, and we've made a decision that's going to be difficult for you to hear, but it's what's best for everyone involved." The word decision struck me like a physical blow. Not "we've been thinking" or "we'd like to suggest," but "we've made a decision," as if my own life and home were theirs to decide about. "I sold the beach house." Ashley continued her words, hitting me like a tsunami. "The buyers want to take possession tomorrow, and we need to start getting you packed and moved out today." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The words seemed to hang in the air like something from a nightmare that I desperately wanted to wake up from. My daughter. The little girl I had raised and loved unconditionally for 32 years was sitting in my living room telling me she had sold my home without my knowledge or consent. "What do you mean you sold the house?" I managed to whisper, my voice barely audible over the sound of blood rushing through my ears. Brandon leaned forward, his expression what he probably thought was sympathetic, but came across as condescending. "Marie Ashley has been worried about you living alone in this big house. It's a lot of responsibility for someone your age, and the maintenance costs are getting out of hand. We found a buyer who made an excellent offer, and we used Ashley's power of attorney to complete the sale." The mention of the power of attorney documents I had signed hit me like another wave of betrayal. Those papers were meant to protect me in case of a medical emergency, not to give Ashley carte blanche to make major life decisions on my behalf. "Ashley," I said, my voice growing stronger as my initial shock began to transform into something much more powerful. "I am 58 years old. I am in perfect health, and I am completely capable of making my own decisions about where I live and what I do with my property." My daughter's response revealed a side of her personality that I had never seen before, a coldness that chilled me more than the ocean breeze. "Mum, you're being emotional about this. We're trying to do what's best for your future. This house is worth a lot of money, and rather than having it tied up in real estate, we can invest those funds in something that will provide you with steady income for your retirement." What happened next would become the most painful conversation of my entire life as a mother. Ashley's demeanor shifted from businesslike to something approaching cruelty as she outlined the plans she and Brandon had made for my future, without consulting me about any of it. "Just deal with it, Mom," Ashley said, her voice taking on an edge of impatience that made my blood run cold. "This is what's best for you, whether you like it or not. You're acting like a child instead of recognizing that adults sometimes have to make tough decisions." Those words cut deeper than any physical wound I had ever experienced. My own daughter was dismissing my feelings, my autonomy, and my right to control my own life, as if I were an incompetent child, rather than the woman who had raised her, supported her through every challenge, and loved her unconditionally. Brandon, emboldened by Ashley's harsh tone, decided to add his own perspective to the situation. "Marie, let's talk about the financial realities here. You're living alone in a house that's costing you thousands of dollars every month in property taxes, utilities, insurance, and maintenance. At your age, you should be focused on preserving your capital, not spending it on upkeep for a property that's too big for your needs." The phrase "at your age" felt like a slap across my face. I was 58 years old, not 88. I was healthy, active, financially stable, and completely capable of managing my own affairs. But my daughter and son-in-law were treating me like an elderly woman who had lost her mental faculties. Ashley continued her assault on my independence, with a litany of observations that revealed how little she actually knew about my life and capabilities. "Mum, you're lonely out here. You don't have any real friends nearby, and you spend most of your time by yourself, just thinking about Dad and living in the past. This isn't healthy for you, and we can't just watch you waste away in this house surrounded by memories that are keeping you from moving forward with your life." Each word was like a dagger to my heart. Yes, I missed David terribly, but I had built a rich, fulfilling life since his passing. I had my book club, my volunteer work at the local animal shelter, my yoga classes, and my beautiful garden that brought me joy every single day. I had friends in the community, neighbors, who checked on me, and activities that gave my life meaning and purpose. But Ashley had clearly decided that my life wasn't valuable or valid because it didn't match her vision of what a widow's life should look like. "We've already found you a perfect apartment," she continued, pulling out printed listings from Brandon's briefcase. "It's a nice one-bedroom unit in a senior community about 20 minutes from our house. There's a dining hall where you can eat meals with other people your age, activities, programs to keep you busy, and transportation services, so you won't have to worry about driving everywhere." The description of my future living situation sounded more like a prison sentence than a home. A one-bedroom apartment, scheduled meals with strangers, activities, programs designed to keep elderly residents occupied rather than engaged in meaningful pursuits, transportation services that would eliminate my independence and freedom of movement. "The movers will be here tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock sharp," Ashley announced, with the finality of a judge delivering a sentence. "Pack whatever personal items you want to keep. Everything else can be donated or thrown away. The new owners want the house empty and clean by noon." Brandon nodded in agreement, adding his own ultimatum to the discussion. "We've already put deposits down on the apartment and hired the moving company, so this is happening whether you cooperate or not. We're trying to make this as easy as possible for you, but you need to accept that this decision has been made for your own good." I sat in my armchair, surrounded by 37 years of memories in this house, listening to my daughter and son-in-law dismantle my life as if I were already dead. The casual way they discussed disposing of my possessions, the assumption that I would meekly comply with their plans, and the complete disregard for my feelings or preferences revealed a level of disrespect that I had never imagined possible from my own child. "Ashley," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside me. "This house isn't just where I live. It's where you grew up. It's where you learned to ride a bike on the driveway, where you had your 16th birthday party on the beach, where you brought your first boyfriend to meet your father and me. How can you just throw away all of those memories?" Her response revealed the depth of her callousness. Those are just memories, Mom. I don't need a house to remember my childhood. And frankly, holding on to the past isn't helping you build a future. It's time to be practical instead of sentimental. As I sat there listening to my daughter and son-in-law systematically destroy everything I held dear, something inside me began to shift. The initial shock and pain were slowly being replaced by a clarity that I hadn't felt since David's death. In that moment of absolute betrayal, I remembered something very important that Ashley and Brandon had completely overlooked in their calculations. They thought they knew everything about my financial situation. They had seen the beach house, the savings account statements, the life insurance payout, and the modest investment portfolio that David had left behind. What they hadn't discovered, despite their obvious investigation into my affairs, was the extensive real estate empire I had built over the past 25 years. While Ashley continued outlining the logistics of my forced relocation, describing the timeline for packing the arrangements she had made with local charities to pick up my furniture, and the specific items she thought I should prioritize for my new, much smaller living space, I was making my own calculations. My rental properties across Los Angeles County were generating approximately $18,000 per month in passive income. The two apartment complexes I owned were each worth well over $1 million in the current market. The commercial building downtown that I had purchased during the market downturn of 2008 had tripled in value and now housed 3 thriving businesses that paid premium rents. More importantly, all of these assets were held in a trust that I had established with a different attorney managed through a separate bank and documented in files that I kept in a safety deposit box that Ashley didn't even know existed. I had been so careful to keep these investments private, not out of secrecy or distrust, but because I believed in financial independence and wanted to ensure that my family's security wasn't dependent on any single source of income. Now, as I watched my daughter treat me like an incompetent elderly woman who couldn't manage her own affairs, I realized that my caution had provided me with something much more valuable than financial security. It had given me the power to teach Ashley a lesson about respect assumptions and the dangerous consequences of underestimating the people you claim to love. I made a decision in that moment that would change the course of this entire situation. Instead of arguing, pleading, or trying to convince Ashley and Brandon that they were making a terrible mistake, I decided to let them proceed with their plan while I prepared my own response. "All right," I said calmly, my voice betraying none of the strategy that was forming in my mind. "If this is what you think is best, then I suppose I'll have to trust your judgment." The relief on Ashley's face was almost insulting. She had expected a fight tears or an emotional breakdown that would require them to spend hours convincing me to comply. Instead, my apparent surrender made her believe that she had successfully managed a difficult situation. "I'm so glad you're being reasonable about this, Mom," she said, her tone shifting to something that might have been intended as warmth, but felt more like condescension. "I know this seems scary now, but in a few months you'll realize how much better your life is, without all the stress and responsibility of maintaining this big house." Brandon, eager to reinforce Ashley's narrative, added his own reassurances. "Marie, this is really the smartest financial move you could make. The real estate market is at a peak right now, and putting that money into managed investments will give you much better returns than keeping it tied up in property." I nodded politely while mentally reviewing the contact information for my attorney, my accountant, and my property manager. I had phone calls to make, documents to review, and a strategy to implement. But first, I needed Ashley and Brandon to leave so I could begin preparing for the surprise I was about to deliver. After Ashley and Brandon left, convinced that they had successfully manipulated me into compliance with their scheme, I spent the rest of the afternoon making phone calls that would set the stage for what was about to become the most satisfying moment of my adult life. My first call was to Harold Martinez, my family attorney, who was shocked to hear about Ashley's actions and immediately began explaining the legal implications of what had transpired. Marie, what Ashley did is legally questionable at best and potentially fraudulent at worst, Harold explained. The medical power of attorney she used was never intended to give her authority to make major financial decisions on your behalf, especially when you're clearly competent to make those decisions yourself. My second call was to Patricia Williams, the attorney who managed my private real estate trust. Patricia and I had worked together for over 15 years, and she knew every detail of my investment portfolio. When I explained the situation with Ashley, she was both appalled and intrigued by the opportunity to set the record straight. Marie, Patricia said, I think it's time your family learned the truth about your financial independence. Would you like me to prepare a comprehensive portfolio summary that shows the full extent of your assets? My third call was to Marcus Chen, my property manager, who oversaw the day-to-day operations of my rental properties and apartment complexes. Marcus had been managing my investments for 8 years and had helped me build one of the most successful small-scale real estate portfolios in the county. Mrs. Marie, Marcus said in his efficient professional manner, I have the quarterly reports ready if you need them. Your properties are performing exceptionally well, and we have a waiting list for every unit. Your monthly income has actually increased 12% over last year. By early evening, I had assembled a complete picture of my financial situation that would shock Ashley and Brandon into recognizing the magnitude of their miscalculation. My total assets, including the beach house. They thought they had sold the investment properties they didn't know existed, and the commercial real estate they couldn't have imagined were worth approximately $8.2 million. But money wasn't the point of the lesson I was about to teach my daughter. This was about respect, trust, and the fundamental right of every human being to control their own destiny, regardless of their age or family relationships. I spent the evening in my garden, walking among the roses and lavender that I had planted with David years ago, thinking about the conversation that would take place the next morning. I wasn't angry anymore. I was disappointed, hurt, and determined to ensure that Ashley understood the consequences of treating the people you love with such casual cruelty. As the sun set over the Pacific Ocean, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, I realized that this crisis had given me something unexpected. It had shown me that I was stronger and more independent than I had ever imagined. David's death had left me feeling vulnerable and uncertain about my ability to navigate life alone. But Ashley's betrayal had revealed that I was not only capable of taking care of myself, but that I had actually thrived in ways that would surprise everyone who thought they knew me. I called Ashley around 9 o'clock that evening, keeping my voice cheerful and cooperative. Sweetheart, I just wanted to let you know that I'm ready for tomorrow. I've packed the essentials, and I've made arrangements for Mrs. Rodriguez to handle the final cleaning after the movers leave. Thank you for taking care of everything. I know this wasn't easy for you. The relief and satisfaction in Ashley's voice were unmistakable. She believed she had successfully managed a difficult family situation, and that her mother had gracefully accepted the inevitable changes that age and widowhood required. Oh, Mum, I'm so proud of you for being so mature about this transition. I know it's hard to leave the house where you and Dad were so happy, but you're going to love your new apartment. It's going to be so much better for you to be around people and have less responsibility. I wished her good night and went to bed with a sense of anticipation that I hadn't felt since I was a child, waiting for Christmas morning. The next morning arrived with clear skies and calm seas, as if nature itself was providing the perfect backdrop for the dramatic revelation that was about to unfold. I woke up early, had my usual breakfast while watching the sunrise, and then dressed carefully in a navy blue blazer and slacks that projected both authority and confidence. At exactly 8 o'clock, Ashley and Brandon arrived with the moving truck they had hired. They were accompanied by 3 workers who began unloading boxes and equipment, while Ashley supervised the process. with the efficiency of someone who had planned every detail. "Good morning, Mum," Ashley said, giving me a perfunctory hug. "I'm so proud of how well you're handling this. The apartment is going to be perfect for you, and you're going to wonder why you waited so long to make this change." Brandon, clearly pleased with what he saw as a successful real estate transaction, was practically glowing as he surveyed the house that he believed they had just converted into liquid assets. "Marie, I've already spoken with our financial advisor about investment options for the proceeds from the sale. We're thinking about a conservative portfolio that will give you steady monthly income without the risks and fluctuations of the stock market." For 30 minutes, I watched them direct the packing and removal of my possessions while discussing my future, as if I were a child who needed their guidance and protection. Ashley pointed out items that she thought were too big for my new apartment. Brandon calculated the monetary value of furniture and artwork that they planned to sell or donate. Neither of them asked my opinion about anything. Then at 8:35 in the morning, I decided it was time to end their charade. "Actually, sweetheart," I said to Ashley in a calm, clear voice that carried across the living room, "there's something very important you should know about your mother's financial situation before we go any further." Something in my tone must have alerted Ashley that this wasn't going to be another expression of gratitude for her management of my affairs. She looked at me with a puzzled expression, while Brandon continued organizing documents in his briefcase. "What do you mean, Mom?" Ashley asked, her voice beginning to show the first signs of uncertainty. I walked to the kitchen counter, where I had arranged the documents that Patricia Williams had delivered earlier that morning. The portfolio summary was impressive, even to me, presented in a leather binder with detailed financial statements, property appraisals, and legal documentation that painted a picture of success that neither Ashley nor Brandon could have anticipated. "I mean that your assumption about my financial capabilities and independence was based on incomplete information," I said, returning to the living room with the binder in my hands. "You thought you knew everything about my assets and my ability to take care of myself. But you were wrong about almost everything." Brandon looked up from his briefcase, his attention now fully focused on our conversation. Ashley's expression was shifting from puzzlement to concern as she began to sense that something significant was about to change. "I own 6 rental properties in prime locations throughout Los Angeles County." I began opening the portfolio to the first page of property listings. Each property generates between $2,000 and $4,000 per month in rental income, depending on the size and location. Ashley's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. "I also own 2 apartment complexes in Venice and Santa Monica." I continued, turning to the next section of documents. "The Venice property has 12 units and is currently valued at $1.3 million. The Santa Monica complex has 16 units and is worth approximately $1.7 million. Brandon had stopped organizing his papers entirely and was now staring at me with an expression that suggested his world was beginning to shift on its axis. "In addition to residential properties, I own a commercial building in downtown Los Angeles that houses 3 businesses and generates $8,000 per month in rental income. The building is currently appraised at $2.4 million. I paused to let these numbers sink in before delivering the final piece of information that would complete Ashley's understanding of exactly how wrong she had been about me. "The total value of my real estate portfolio, not including this beach house, is approximately $6.8 million. Combined with my other investments and savings, my net worth is $8.2 million. The silence in the room was so complete that I could hear the ocean waves breaking on the shore outside. Ashley was staring at the documents in my hands as if they were written in a foreign language. Brandon's face had gone completely pale. "But how is that possible?" Ashley whispered. "We looked through all your financial records. We saw the bank statements and the investment accounts Dad left you." You saw the financial records that I shared with your father and that were part of our joint estate planning, I explained patiently. What you didn't know is that for 25 years, I built my own independent investment portfolio using my salary and bonuses from my marketing career. I kept these investments private because I believed in financial independence and wanted to ensure that our family's security wasn't dependent on any single income source. Brandon was the first to find his voice, though it came out as barely more than a croak. Are you saying that you've been a millionaire this entire time and never told anyone? I'm saying that I'm a financially independent woman who is perfectly capable of managing her own affairs, making her own decisions about where to live, and determining her own future, I replied. What I'm also saying is that your assumption that I needed your protection and management was not only wrong but deeply insulting. Ashley's face had gone through a remarkable transformation over the course of our conversation. The confident, business-like expression she had worn while directing my eviction had crumbled into something approaching panic. Mum, I had no idea. If I had known about your other properties, I never would have. You never would have what, Ashley? I interrupted, my voice remaining calm, but carrying an edge of steel. You never would have treated me like an incompetent elderly woman. You never would have sold my home without asking my permission. You never would have dismissed my feelings and independence as childish and unrealistic. The moving crew had stopped their work and were standing awkwardly in the hallway, clearly sensing that they had walked into the middle of a family crisis that was far more complicated than a simple relocation. Since you've demonstrated such concern about my ability to manage my financial affairs, I continued, I've decided to make some changes that will address those concerns once and for all. I've contacted my attorney to remove you entirely from my will and establish a charitable trust that will donate my entire estate to organizations that support housing for displaced families and financial literacy programs for young adults. Ashley's face went completely white, and for a moment I thought she might faint. Mum, please, she said, her voice breaking. I was only trying to help you. I thought you were struggling financially and emotionally, and I wanted to make sure you were safe and taken care of. No, Ashley, I replied. You wanted to control me because it made you feel important and powerful. You wanted to manage my life because you assumed I was too weak and incompetent to manage it myself. And most importantly, you never bothered to ask me what I wanted or needed before deciding what was best for me. The aftermath of my revelation created a moment of such profound silence that it seemed as if the entire universe had paused to absorb the magnitude of what had just occurred. Ashley stood frozen in the middle of my living room, surrounded by boxes containing possessions that she had been so casually preparing to dispose of, while the truth about her mother's capabilities settled into her consciousness like a physical weight. Mum, she whispered, her voice filled with a combination of shock, embarrassment, and growing panic. I'm so sorry. I had no idea about any of this. If you can just give me a chance to explain why I thought this was the right thing to do. But I wasn't ready to accept her apologies or explanations. The pain of her betrayal was still too fresh, the insult to my autonomy too severe, and the casual cruelty of her dismissal too hurtful to simply forgive, because she had discovered her mistake. Ashley, for the past year, you've treated me like a burden rather than your mother. You've made assumptions about my mental capacity, my financial stability, and my ability to make rational decisions about my own life. You've invaded my privacy, manipulated legal documents, and tried to force me into a living situation that would have destroyed my independence and happiness. Brandon, who had been remarkably quiet since learning about my actual financial situation, finally found the courage to speak. Marie, I think there's been a serious misunderstanding here. We genuinely believed that we were helping you transition to a more manageable lifestyle. The financial information we had suggested that maintaining this house was putting a strain on your resources. The financial information you had was obtained by going through my private papers without permission, questioning my neighbors about my personal business, and using a medical power of attorney in a way that was never intended. I responded. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a calculated attempt to take control of my life based on your own assumptions about what was best for me. I walked to the large windows overlooking the ocean and stood there for a moment gathering my thoughts, while Ashley and Brandon absorbed the full implications of their mistake. I want you both to understand something very clearly. I continued, turning back to face them. I am not a helpless widow who needs to be managed and protected. I am a successful businesswoman who built a multi-million-dollar real estate portfolio while maintaining a marriage, raising a daughter, and pursuing a demanding career. I am not lonely, isolated, or living in the past. I am thriving in a home and community that I love, surrounded by friends and activities that give my life meaning and purpose. The moving crew supervisor, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding around him, approached us hesitantly. Ma'am, should we continue packing? Or would you like us to wait while you folks sort things out? Before Ashley could respond, I addressed the supervisor directly. You can unload everything and leave, I said firmly. There will be no move today or any other day. This lady does not have the authority to make decisions about my living arrangements, and any contract she may have signed regarding my property is invalid. Ashley's face crumpled as the reality of the situation hit her with full force. Not only had she spectacularly misjudged her mother's financial capabilities, but she had also exposed herself to potential legal consequences for fraudulent use of power of attorney documents. Mum, what can I do to fix this? She asked, tears beginning to flow down her cheeks. I know I messed up terribly, but I love you and I never wanted to hurt you. I just thought... You thought that being 58 years old automatically made me incompetent to manage my own affairs. I finished. You thought that being widowed meant I was helpless and needed your protection. You thought that living in the house where I built my life with your father was somehow unhealthy or inappropriate. And most importantly, you thought that your opinions about my life were more valid than my own feelings and preferences. Over the next hour, as the moving crew packed up their equipment and left Ashley and Brandon, gradually came to understand the full extent of the damage they had done to our family relationship. The house sale that they thought they had arranged was legally meaningless because they had never had the authority to sell property they didn't own. The apartment they had rented for me would have to be cancelled. The financial planning they had done, based on the proceeds from my house sale, was based on money that was never going to exist. But beyond the practical consequences of their actions, they were beginning to realize that they had destroyed something much more valuable than any financial transaction. They had shattered the trust and respect that forms the foundation of every loving family relationship. I don't know how to make this right, Ashley said, sitting on my sofa with her head in her hands. I thought I was being a good daughter by taking care of you. I thought you needed me to step in and manage things because you seemed so sad and isolated since Dad died. Ashley, if you had asked me how I was feeling instead of assuming you knew what I needed, if you had included me in conversations about my future instead of making decisions for me, if you had treated me like a competent adult instead of an incompetent child, we could have had a completely different conversation about my life and my plans. I sat down across from her, my anger beginning to soften into something closer to disappointment and sadness. I am sad about your father's death. I will always miss him and wish he was still here to share my life. But sadness isn't the same as incompetence, and grief doesn't automatically make someone incapable of making rational decisions about their own future. Through her tears, Ashley began to articulate what she was finally beginning to understand about the magnitude of her mistake. I see now that I treated you exactly the way I would hate to be treated, I made assumptions about what you could handle, what you needed, and what would make you happy without ever actually asking you. I'm so ashamed of how arrogant and controlling I was. The conversation that followed was painful, honest, and necessary. Ashley began to understand that her perception of my life as lonely and meaningless was a projection of her own fears about aging and loss, rather than an accurate assessment of my actual experience. Brandon acknowledged that his focus on financial optimization had blinded him to the emotional and psychological value of my independence and autonomy. By the end of that long, difficult day, we had begun the process of rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect, rather than assumptions about age, capability, and need. Ashley agreed to attend family counseling with me to work through the trust issues that her actions had created. Brandon committed to treating me as an equal partner in any future discussions about family matters, rather than a problem to be solved. But the most important outcome of this crisis was my own renewed confidence in my strength, independence, and ability to protect myself from anyone who would try to diminish or control me, regardless of their relationship to me or their stated good intentions. As Ashley and Brandon prepared to leave that evening, I made one final decision about the consequences of their actions. Ashley, I'm not going to remove you from my will entirely, I said, but your portion of my estate will be significantly reduced, and it will be placed in a trust that requires you to demonstrate financial responsibility and respect for elderly family members before you can access it. Sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is ensure that their children learn from their mistakes. I walked them to the door of the house they had tried to take away from me, and stood on the porch that David and I had built together, watching them drive away into a sunset that painted the ocean in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. That night, I sat in my garden among the roses and lavender, listening to the waves and thinking about the unexpected gift that Ashley's betrayal had given me. I had discovered reserves of strength and determination that I hadn't known I possessed. I had learned that financial independence was about more than money. It was about the power to control your own destiny and protect yourself from those who would diminish your worth. Most importantly, I had learned that love without respect is just manipulation, and that sometimes the people closest to us need the strongest boundaries to prevent them from causing irreparable harm. The moon rose over the Pacific Ocean, casting silver light across the water, and through the windows of the house where I would continue to live on my own terms, surrounded by memories that gave me strength rather than holding me back, and secure in the knowledge that I was exactly where I belonged. Have you ever had someone in your family underestimate your abilities or try to control your life decisions? Share your story in the comments below and let me know how you handled the situation. Don't forget to hit that like button if this story resonated with you, and subscribe for more real-life stories about family independence and standing up for yourself. And please share this video with anyone who might be facing similar challenges with family members who think they know what's best. Remember, your age doesn't define your worth, and your independence is always worth fighting for. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you always have the courage to stand up for your right to control your own destiny.